Haue Imperator, morituri te salutant. These famous words recorded by Suetonius show us the vocative case in Latin, Imperator. But this is exactly the same as the nominative case, Imperator. What's going on here? We're going to talk all about the vocative case today. I'm Luke, and this is polýMATHY. Latin is a highly inflected language. The nouns in Latin will change their ending depending on their function in a sentence, their grammatical function. Today we're just going to talk about the nominative case, when a noun is in its normal subject of the sentence form, and the vocative case, when you're talking to something or someone. For example, if we were talking to Marcus, we would say Salve Marque, or Marque when you hook, something like that. We would change Marcus to Marque. That's what the vocative case is. But this only actually occurs in Latin in nouns of the second declension that end in us. Because there are other nouns in the second declension, like puer, but puer doesn't change. Puer, which is the nominative for boy, just remains boy. And other nouns that happen in, say, the first declension, which has a lot of feminine nouns, no, those don't change at all. Poella, girl, or femina, those don't change. Salve femina, salve poella, those don't change at all. Puer doesn't change, but a wolf, lupus, oh, haue lupe, or noli me esse lupe, don't eat me, wolf, that will change. Now, when we talk about nouns of the second declension that end in us, we think of these masculine names in particular. They'll end in us, like, say, Marcus, but we also have names that end in ius, like Julius. Now, for those names, we actually do something different. Instead of just changing the us to e, we change the ius to just a long e, just a long letter I. So the vocative of Julius isn't Julie, but is Juli. In a much more archaic version of Latin, probably it was, because ancient Greek retains a similar vocative form. For example, an ancient Greek name like Dionysios, if you wanted to say Chaire Dionysiae, it would do that. But the same name, borrowed into Latin, Dionysius, would be Dionysi when you wanted to actually greet that person. A use of the vocative case that is sometimes forgotten has to do with second declension nouns that are feminine. They end in us, like cupressus, the cypress tree. Salve cupresse, it'll change like that, even though it's feminine. And also laurus. There, that woman there, she's wearing laurus, a corona of the laurel wreath. So if you wanted to actually talk to your own laurel, you would say, Haue laure. Ecce corvus est. Salve corve. So nouns that end in us, like corvus, or raven, that will change. But actually this looks a little bit like a cornix to me, and that's more of a crow. Corvus is often used for raven, and there's a slight difference in those kinds of birds, right? Cornix is not a second declension noun, and it doesn't end in us. And as a Latin noun, the vocative form, salve cornix, cornix est. It doesn't change. But if it is a corvus, salve corve, it does change. There are also nouns of the second declension that are neuter. Well, if you know Latin, that's not a surprise. There's oppidum and templum, like right over there. Here, in this direction here, is where the Templum of Veneris and Romae, the Temple of Venus and Rome, used to stand. That's the pediment of it, as well as a whole bunch of other temples that are here near the Roman Forum. Well, if I were to say Salve Templum, well, that doesn't change. But there are neuter nouns of the second declension that end in us. And I can think of just two off the top of my head. Virus, which means slime, and this is where the word for virus comes from. It's virus, viri, different from viri, which is short, right? This is viri, of the slime or of the virus. Viro, and then virus in the accusative, because that's how it is in the nominative. And the wonderful rule in Latin and many other Indo-European languages is that the neuter in the nominative and the accusative is always the same. Of course, viro for the ablative. And the other one is the vulgus, the common people. And vulgus, it ends in us, and it's second declension, but it's actually neuter. And these are lovely little anomalies that are in Latin. But we wouldn't say salve vulge we would say salve vulgus or salve virus if you're actually addressing those things in the vocative case. They wouldn't change because the rule, as far as we understand it grammatically, is that it applies to feminine and masculine nouns, masculine and feminine nouns, so like the salve cupresse, hello to the cypress tree, and to other nouns that are feminine but second declension that end in us, but not, and to masculine ones, but not to neuter ones. There's only a couple of them anyway. And again, that's also different for a word like manus. Manus, although it ends in us, is a fourth declension noun. And its declension is manus, manus, genitive, and the vocative form is the same as the nominative. The vocative case only applies to nouns of the second declension that end in us, that are masculine and feminine. So that's it, right? All we have to do is know that nouns of the second declension that end in us, if they're masculine or feminine, change to e or to if if it ends in ius. But wait, Latin has borrowed so many words, especially proper nouns, from Greek. And ancient Greek is a little bit different. For example, there are a lot of names that are third declension in Greek, and they also are, of course, in Latin. Like, say, Amaryllis, and that's a character that we hear a lot about in Virgil's Eclogues. And that declension in Latin would be Amaryllis, and then the genitive would be Amarylidis or Amarylidos, if you want to make a really Greek declension. We'll talk about the Greek declension in Latin in another video. But the vocative, salve Amarylli, and if it's testulis, it would be salve testuli. Or Alexis, oh Alexi, with a short letter I, which is a very odd thing in Latin. That's really something that's unique to Greek, because Latin doesn't like to end things with a short letter I. It makes all letter I at the end of a word long. So third declension nouns, if they come from Greek, they might in fact have a vocative form in ancient Greek, and then often Latin authors that use those names will retain that vocative. That isn't necessarily a Latin rule, though, so it is possible to see a noun taken from Greek used in Latin that doesn't actually obey the rules of the vocative or of the declension in Greek. But often, many authors will, and it gives a kind of air of being fancy and cultured. There are some other nouns from Greek which are borrowed into Latin that have vocative forms that we just normally wouldn't expect. For example, the famous hero of the Aeneid, Aeneas, his name is a first declension noun, but it ends in an S. In Latin, nouns of the first declension don't end in S, but they can in Greek. There's a lot of masculine nouns in Greek that end in AS, and Aeneas is one of them. So if we were to greet Aeneas, it would be, oh, Aenea, like that. That's how we would greet him. And when we have nouns that end in es, like say Laertes, which is Laertes, the father of Ulysses or of Odysseus. For that, we would change it also to just a, so it would be salve Laerta. And this is like the Greek word mathetes, which means student. The vocative form is matheta, chaire matheta. There's actually a lot of variety in how the vocative forms occur in these Greek names. For example, Koryudon, which is a character in the second eclogue of Virgil. In that eclogue, we see the vocative form Koryudon, and it's short there, Koryudon, Koryudon, instead of Koryudon, which is how it is when it's in the nominative form. And that change we also see in the name for Apollo in Greek, which is Apollon, but the vocative form is Apollon. Also Poseidon, Poseidon, Poseidon. So we have the shortening of that letter O. So that covers everything, right? That's all about the vocative Latin. It's super simple. It's just names that end in us that are masculine except for the feminine ones, like the different kinds of trees, the apple tree, malus, male, salve male, hello apple tree. So that's all fine. And then we only have to deal with a smattering of Greek names that are just peppered throughout Latin literature. Okay, that's not a big deal. But we've only talked about nouns, the substantives. What about adjectives? Well, Aulus Gellius has a lovely anecdote about that. Aulus Gellius talks about one time he was, I think somewhere around here, probably in Rome, And two grammarians were walking by, and he overheard their conversation. And the one grammarian was saying that adjectives that end in ius, like egregius, the egregious one, which is a positive thing in Latin, it should be o egregie, and be or salui egregie, hello, egregious or excellent one. And the other one said, no, since it's ius, it must be like egregi. And they went back and forth saying, well, with these kinds of adjectives, obviously we say it as ie and not as e. And then the other one said, well, would you say that with the word like inskius, and where you would say inskie instead? So they went back and forth so many times on which it should be for all of these adjectives that eventually Aulus Gellius, who was overhearing this whole thing, got fed up and left. Now, someone who's fascinated about the reconstruction of not only the sound of Latin, but the usage of Latin in an actual correct way, I really wanted to know what Aulus Gellius' opinion was. I could hear what this grammarian and that grammarian were both saying, but I couldn't, determine which one should it be. But now thinking about it, living actual languages have all kinds of irregularities. And it seems like this is a case where we just have to follow what ancient authors have done with different nouns. It doesn't seem that we can apply a broad rule to all adjectives that end in ius, like egregius or inskius. Sometimes they might end with just an e, sometimes with ie, and that is probably fine both ways. And we'll just have to do our best as modern authors and speakers of the Latin language. And from the Via Sacra, oh look, it's Arcus Diti, the Arch of Titus, in Rome, Italy, I bid you, valete. Guarda. Ecce, corvus est. There are... Se ne frega.
Ok.
Aspetta. Siamo a Roma, un sacco di tizi. Infatti un Titus, un arco di Titi.
Ok.
The vocative form is matheta. Chiaere matheta. When... I think I just finished. Oh!